Comic Geek Speak presents Murd's Time Bubble, the 25th time. Welcome aboard the Time Bubble. My name is Adam Murdo, on a mission of mercy to the mind-starved masses here in the dog days of summer. And I'm coming to you now with a load of emergency rations of content here in the midst of a unusually long Comic Geek Speak dry spell. About which a few words. I realize that, as you well know, my Time Bubble true believers, it's becoming practically a matter of convention here aboard the Time Bubble for me to begin each installment with kind of a mealy-mouthed, foot-shuffling, lame apology for something or other, usually having to do with the long silence in between episodes of the Time Bubble. And I suppose I could apologize for that here, too, but, looking back between the 25th time and the recent 24th time, there's only been a gap of, 3 months? And, contrasting that to my overall track record over the past several years of doing this spin-off podcast, that's actually not that bad. Not by bubble standards. No, but there are other forms of dereliction for which an accounting must be made, and by that I mean, although it's only been 3 months since the last Time Bubble episode, it has at the same time been nearly 2 weeks since the last episode of any Comic Geek Speak offering has reached the ears of our faithful listeners, and that is highly irregular and probably not to be tolerated. And I do apologize on behalf of the entire Comic Geek Speak Collegium for this long drought of Comic Geek conversation content. And the explanation for it, friends, is very simply this. It is, as I said a few moments ago, the dog days of summer. We're running out of August here, folks. Labor Day looms large, and for all of us on CGS, especially those of us who have families, including children, we begin to feel the crush to get out into the world and make the most of what time remains to fulfill our summer recreation plans. Take those family trips that we've been meaning to take but have been postponing for one reason or another before sports practices kick in or schools reconvene. And that's happening all over the nation now, folks. So it was in the case of Chris, who went on a family trip just this past week, and Shane, who has a couple of kids he needs to get down to the Delaware beaches sometime soon. It just makes the scheduling of recording sessions that much more difficult. And I must say, I must shoulder some of this guilt myself, even though I have no offspring or romantic attachments to speak of, and thus less excuse than some of the others for continuing to record podcasts. I did, however, play host to our annual Comic Geek Speak gathering in Stone Harbor, our CGS by the Sea weekend, as we like to call it, for many CGS family members and friends. So just this past weekend, Shane was here in my family's home in Stone Harbor, just a couple of blocks from the beach. It's the first time in the 7 or so years that I've been hosting these gatherings that Shane has been able to, temporarily slip the bonds of paternal responsibility and come down here and hang out with us. And it's the first time he's been back to Stone Harbor in some 20 years, and we all hail him, semi-jokingly, as being responsible for the wonderful weather we had down here. He was our lucky rabbit's foot, we think. So Shane came, Pants came, the entire Brian Deemer family was down here. Danny and Bill came from northern Jersey, and a few other friends as well. All of us hanging out down here for a nice long weekend of, as Chris likes to put it, fellowship. So we went to the beach, we swam, we lay in the sun, tabletop games were played, comics were read, as we made use of the expansive porch of our house here to go out there and just enjoy the cooling breeze and as it riffles through the pages of a 32-page 4-color frolic. This was one of Jamie's favorite activities to do when he was down here for the CGS by the Sea weekends, and so we always honored him by going out there and just having some quiet time reading comics on the front porch. So it was a lovely weekend, a good time had by all, very glad we were able to do it once again, but the downside there is we were all having such a good time that not a word was spoken about recording. We did not record a lick, nor did we make any semblance of plans to record during the following week. I apologize for all of this. We do intend to get back on track fairly soon here, folks. But in the meantime, I am pitching in on my own, taking time out of my own busy Stone Harbor work schedule to set aside a couple of hours to just rap with you all about 14-year-old sequential art jams that I've enjoyed within the last, within the very recent past. That's sort of our theme and gimmick here on the Time Bubble, by the way, for those of you who are among the uninitiated. Yes, I'm very far behind in my comics reading, and this podcast is my opportunity to ruminate and contemplate upon certain comic books that I bought when they were new back in the early 2000s and have not gotten around to reading until here, low in the mid-2000 teens. So it's kind of a back-issue spotlight thing that we've got going here on the Time Bubble. And it's a great deal of fun for me because it gives me a chance to share my thoughts on these comics that, if not for my connection to CGS, I might have come to a decade and a half too late to find an approving and patient ear to hear what thoughts I may have. So thank you all for being that patient, sympathetic, and approving ear, my Bubble Legion. And so, before moving on here, let me issue yet one more apology for another form of dereliction. This Time Bubble episode, which is being released, as I've pretty much given you to know, as something of a stopgap measure to plug a hole in the Comic Geek Speak proper release schedule. And not only am I'm sitting here in our home in Stone Harbor. It's my secondary Time Bubble docking bay, Stone Harbor, New Jersey, circa 2015. And I'm doing this during a break in the middle of the day from my shift at the Christmas shop down here. It's only a 2.5-hour break, so of necessity I'm going to have to be fairly rapid fire and a little briefer than usual in this episode. But even if I had all the time in the world, this still would be a slightly shorter Time Bubble episode than the normal 2.5, 3 or more hours. If only because, well, okay, here's the explanation why. I do have at my apartment back in Pennsylvania a pile. Said apartment is actually just one big pile of piles, truth be known. But one of these piles consists of comic books that I have read and that I haven't put away yet, that are just sitting there waiting to be vetted for discussion here on the Murd's Time Bubble podcast. So they're sort of in a transitional or liminal phase between sitting in the mammoth reading backlog that I have, between sitting around in those piles and being safely filed away and alphabetized in long boxes. They're betwixt and between and waiting for my attention. And during my last visit to Pennsylvania, which I do make occasionally every so few weeks, I drive home from Stone Harbor, spend some time at our home Christmas store, Murdo's Christmas Barn in Robesonia, Pennsylvania, checking in with the home office, looking around for Christmas stock to transport from there to here in Stone Harbor, and running a bunch of little errands. It's a lot to fit into one day, and then I have to go dashing off in the evening to the CGS studio to participate in a group recording session so that I may interact with my CGS brethren face-to-face in person, which leaves me not as much time to certain tasks that I must perform during these rapid-fire, scatter-shot, single-day trip visits back to Pennsylvania must be short-shrifted of necessity because, after all, these are only single days we're talking about here. So, last time I was home, when I was going through that pile of comics for Time Bubble fodder, I was obliged to pick rather more quickly than I would have liked, and looking at the pile that I brought with me with an eye to one day recording a Time Bubble down here, and the reasons why that day has now come I've already gone into, I discovered that I really only had about 3 comics that I felt were worth examination at greater length. So we've really got only 3 full-scale reviews for you here, folks, plus a few tiny bubbles / quick pops, shorter reviews to follow those. So now that I've spent something like 9.25 minutes yammering on about this and that and apologizing and the end result is I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot here. So, okay, what's past this prologue? Let's just move on here. Hopefully this will be a leaner, meaner, tighter, more focused episode of the Time Bubble, though I'm sure as heck not promising that, given my track record with these recordings in the past. So, let's jump right to it here now, and talk about the first of my 3 comics to be reviewed here in this episode. As apologies to my friends over at the Back to the Bins podcast, I promise you I'm not biting your format here. These comics are not divided by 1 Marvel, 1 DC, and 1 Independent. It is, in fact, 2 Marvels and 1 DC. And they're all from approximately the summer of 2001. That's as far as I've gotten with my reviews, although I've gotten somewhat further than that in my actual reading. The first comic I've got here, coming at you like lightning, it's a Thunderbolts comic. Yes, a sampling from one of my very, very favorite Marvel series of the last 20 years. I know my colleague Chris Eberly would agree, because he's been threatening to have the two of us get together on a Thunderbolts Spotlight episode, a regular Comic Geek Speak episode on that subject sometime in the future, though goodness knows when that'll be scheduled, but we'll get around to it sometime, because it's something that he and I are both excited to do, because we both loves our T-bolts. Alright, so this is actually an extra-sized 48-page one-shot. It's entitled Thunderbolts Life Sentences. It's actually not a part of the regular monthly series, which was at that time the first volume of Thunderbolts. So it wasn't a part of that series, or well, not in terms of numbering, at least. In terms of issue content, that's actually less true. I'll get back to that in just a moment. It has a cover date on it of July of 2001, the same month that issue number 52 of the Thunderbolts ongoing series was released. It was written by Fabian Nicieza, who by the mid-2001 was already safely ensconced as the new and definitive writer of the Thunderbolts ongoing series, since the creator and original writer of the series, Kurt Busiek, had already gone his merry way by then and passed the torch seamlessly, I might add, to Mr. Nicieza. And the art is by Charlie Adlard. Yes, that Charlie Adlard. How many of you out there knew that he drew an issue of Thunderbolts sometime in his career, before he was, firmly interred in the world of The Walking Dead? Yep, he actually did some spot work here and there for the Big Two, plus Image, in the early part of his career. And this is an example of that spot work. And the colors are by our friend Brian Miller and his Hi-Fi Color Design Studio. So, yeah, as I said, this is cover dated July of 2001, which positions it sort of on the threshold of a pretty, in this fan's opinion, exciting and key stretch of the original volume of the Thunderbolts series. It's just before the Thunderbolts ongoing became almost 2 comics in one, in which Fabian Nicieza followed the adventures of 2 different casts of Thunderbolts characters, illustrated by 2 different art teams alternating issues. One team of characters were off on Counter-Earth, having adventures of their own, and that is the Counter-Earth that used to be the Heroes Reborn Earth, incidentally. And the other group were still stuck on Earth, dealing with the same old villains trying to find redemption crap that they'd been dealing with for pretty much their entire existence. It's the latter group of characters that this Thunderbolts Life Sentences the one-shot chooses to spotlight. It's a cast of 4 main characters, and they are Hawkeye, enough said, no further introduction needed, I think. Moonstone, the scheming professional psychoanalyst turned supervillain turned superhero, maybe? Yeah, she's kind of a cool, considerate woman who likes to hang out on the sidelines and choose which side of the imaginary moral boundary between good and evil she shall choose to tread, depending on how well it's going to benefit her in the long run. And she is still walking that fine line and playing the angles in this issue, although she's kind of had her judgment shaken a little bit by recent events. Then we've got Songbird, formerly known as Screamin' Mimi, sonic-powered villainous professional wrestler turned supervillain turned superhero. And Mach 2, formerly known as the Beetle, longtime Marvel Universe supervillain, who's one of the most serious of the Thunderbolts about turning his life around. Now, probably the most important thing to know about Thunderbolts' life sentences, for the unfamiliar but curious, is that Well, if you're expecting this one-shot to be a nice, neat little self-contained story, friendly to newer readers, not so much. This is not at all a very good jumping-on point for people who haven't read much Thunderbolts before. It's really only the second Thunderbolts self-contained one-shot. That's, and again, I shouldn't really use the word self-contained because, as I've just said, it isn't really. It's the second one-shot, though, outside of the normal Thunderbolts numbering to be published. The first one was called Distant Rumblings. This was back in the Kurt Busiek era, and it was published in 1997 during the first year of the book's run as part of Marvel's Flashback Month, which was a gimmick that Marvel did during that year in which all issues of Marvel's then ongoing series, all ongoing series that Marvel was then publishing, came out with a -1 numbered issue, containing a story telling tales of the title characters in the days before their secret origins, before they underwent whatever life experiences that set them on the path to becoming the heroes, villains, or in the T-Bolt's case, both, really, that they eventually became and that they were in the pages of most issues of their ongoing series. Yeah, so it's kind of like a origins before the origins thing. It was kind of a fun stunt. It was one of the neater things that Marvel did in the late 90s, I think. And it was, so the Distant Rumblings one-shot was more or less self-contained, and it gave us glimpses into the lives of the Thunderbolts characters before they became villains, and well before they became villains who became heroes, or villains who tried to reform and become heroes is probably a better way to put it. Because that is the overarching theme of the Thunderbolts as a concept, villains trying to find redemption in some small way for past misdeeds, whether they really want to or whether it's kind of foisted upon them by external forces. It's about villains trying to make good. So here we are. That one-shot, though, has very little similarity to Life Sentences, though. I often get the nature and content of the two issues mixed up in my memory, but yeah. Life Sentences is something completely different. You'd sort of expect it, being a one-shot, to be more self-contained and new reader-friendly, but instead what we have here is 48 pages, less advertising space, of course, and $3.50 cover price, a little bit steep for 2001, actually, of further character development and subplot advancement, all spilling out of and closely tied to recent events in the regular Thunderbolts ongoing title. Some of it, in fact, is actually spinning out of the Kurt Busiek-written Maximum Security event, which, as of mid-2001, is about 6 months ago. So, yeah, and it's still having at least some minor impact on the Marvel Universe at that time, which is all of which is made a little bit more difficult to stomach by the fact that this is 2001, and we've just gotten to the beginning of the period when asterisked editorial footnotes explaining certain points of convoluted continuity had begun to go out of fashion at the big two. First at Marvel, and then DC followed suit. So there is not a single little explanatory footnote in this entire issue, and I've got to tell you, if you're jumping into this cold, as I urge you not to do, you're going to be a little bit confused. On the other hand, though, if you are interested in Thunderbolts, if you are trying to collect the series in back issues out of the cheap bins, for example, or if you were a reader of the Thunderbolts series and happened to miss this particular issue, it's something that you really should have in your collection, because it may not be numbered as such, but it really is a part of the Thunderbolts series, and it's very much imbricated into the events of that series at that time. If it had been published nowadays, it probably would have been something more like Thunderbolts number 52.5 or 52.1, that being the Marvel's numbering gimmick of choice just a few short years or months ago. Or even Thunderbolts number 53. What it is basically, by today's parlance, it's just an extra-sized, double-shipped monthly issue of the Thunderbolt ongoing, from a time when Marvel wasn't quite so shameless about double shipping issues of ongoing monthly series. Marvel. Yeah, so yeah. It's basically just another big issue of the series, fitting in roughly between numbers 52 and 53, and it's still good stuff, but it's not to be read at random. You really need to plug it into the correct point in that series sequence. Okay, all of that said, what's this issue actually about? Well, I mentioned it's about these four characters, Hawkeye, Moonstone, Mach 2, or the Beetle, and Songbird. And the Life Sentences It was a sort of a prison imagery thing. That stems directly from Hawkeye's storyline in this issue. It sort of applies to the other characters as well. They're all in metaphorical prisons, prison as a metaphor for moral dilemmas that they all have to face. Really, just an equally apropos title for this issue, in my opinion, would have been something like Deals with the Devil, because all four of these characters find themselves at ethical crossroads where they're presented with a form of temptation from some kind of devil or angel figure in their lives. So Hawkeye, the situation with him is probably the most interesting, and it's the one that plays out most fruitfully in future issues of the Thunderbolts ongoing. Hawkeye is actually in prison at the beginning of this story. This is coming out of, past events in the Thunderbolts series. Another one of the star characters of this issue, Thunderbolts Life Sentences, the Beetle, Abe Jenkins, Mach 2, whatever you want to call him, Hawkeye, when he came in and he appointed himself the new leader and sort of patron. He's kind of like an AA sponsor, for the Villains Anonymous members of the Thunderbolts characters. He had been a villain who was given a second chance by the Avengers and became a hero, and he wanted to give the T-Bolts the same chance, but one of his conditions for coming on board and doing so was that Abe Jenkins had to go to jail to serve time for a murder he had committed some years ago. So the Beetle did do that. He wasn't really there for very long because some government agency sprung him because they needed somebody to infiltrate Justin Hammer, the longtime Marvel Universe crime lord and employer of superpowered mercenaries, Justin Hammer. The government needed somebody to infiltrate his organization, so they got the Beetle to do it, and they commuted his sentence in exchange. Then Hawkeye stumbled on this whole arrangement and used it as blackmail leverage against the government to get full pardon for Abe Jenkins. The government agreed to that, but only on condition of Hawkeye going to jail and serving time for crimes that he had recently committed. Sort of a bit of insurance for the government that Hawkeye didn't get out and try to make good his blackmail threats after all, I think. But so anyway, I'm not really that sure about that explanation, but the important thing is, the upshot, Hawkeye is in fact incarcerated. At a prison called Seagate Correctional Institute, which is located on a stormy little isle in the southern Atlantic off the coast of Georgia. And astute Marvel Comics fans will recognize that name as it's the same prison in which Luke Cage was interned when he volunteered for the fateful experiment that gave him superpowers and turned him into a Power Man. Yes, sir. That is where Hawkeye is in prison. So, leave it to Fab Nick. That's what I call Fabian this is, Fab Nick. Yeah, we're like this. So that's, he knows his Marvel history. So he's returned to that well here, since this is 2001, and the Marvel Universe is sort of between maximum security supervillain lockups at this point. For much of the 90s, Marvel readers were familiar with The Vault, which is a penitentiary for superpowered criminals nestled out in the Colorado Rockies. That had been destroyed by this point, I think, and Brian Michael Bendis had not yet introduced the new supervillain prison, The Raft. So, in the meantime, we have sort of a superhuman offenders block in Seagate, and that's where Hawkeye's been put, right in there with a whole bunch of imprisoned super criminals, many of whom he fought either alone or as part of the Avengers. Just a bunch of people who, on general principle, whether he had ever fought them or not, want to see him dead. So he's serving out his sentence, and he realizes he's not likely to see the end of it before he's just beaten to death by his cellies. And watching over him at this, and wondering whether or not she should help, and really questioning her own ability to make such decisions, is Moonstone. I mentioned earlier that she's one of the ethically iffy of the Thunderbolts. She's one of those that committed the least strongly to this new life path that the Thunderbolts collectively decided to walk. She's still leaning a bit towards the villain side of things. But events during that maximum security crossover I mentioned earlier made her realize that the Moonstone gem that gives her powers also leaves her vulnerable to the influence of the spirit of a long-dead ancient Cree warrior woman, a being of great power and even greater nobility, who has been subtly, mentally, psychically influencing her to do more heroic things and to make more virtuous decisions. And so that's got her head all turned around, a situation that to which she is not at all accustomed. She's usually the one turning other characters' heads around. And her moral decision here, the devil with whom she must deal, is a character that the Thunderbolts had encountered some time ago in their ongoing series, Graviton, a former physicist who gained massive, greater than, Magneto plus level powers. Think a character who's able to do everything Magneto can do, but can do it to all matter, not just metal. Yeah, that he's the master of the fundamental force, as he brags to anyone who will listen. The thing about Graviton is he has all kinds of power, but as Moonstone pointed out to him in an earlier encounter, no motivation. So now, Graviton is basically offering Moonstone a position as his personal therapist and life coach to help him get himself back on the road to success as a megalomaniacal, world-beating villain, and in exchange for that, Moonstone would be in line to receive half of the world to rule. So that is the decision that Moonstone must make here, and naturally, she is very, very, very strongly tempted by this, of course. She doesn't give Graviton an answer by the end of the issue, so it's just a delicious bit of a cliffhanger there for to unfold in future issues of the Thunderbolts series. Then, meanwhile, we've got Beetle, or Mach 2, and Screamin' Mimi, or Songbird, who are living together in Burton Canyon, Colorado, where the Thunderbolts had been holding up not too long ago, and where Songbird and Mach 2 are still living. Mach 2 has gotten himself an honest job at an electronics store, and Songbird, meanwhile, it's not so much an electronics store as it is an electrician's service, but they also sell electrical supplies. And Songbird is trying to find work, but in the meantime she becomes so frustrated that just for fun, pretty much, she shoplifts from a department store where she had applied for work and was turned down. And now she is... this is a woman who has beaten the piss out of superheroes, inflicted serious body harm on innocent people, and I guess it's a sign of how far she's come, as a person, that she's now morally torn over stealing a crappy costume jewelry set from a department store. But that's the moral dilemma she faces. It would be probably the least interesting of the four moral dilemmas presented in this issue, except spinning out of the events of both Maximum Security, there's that title again, that wacky crossover Kurt Busiek did where Earth was used very briefly as a maximum security penitentiary for alien supercriminals by a concerned consortium of alien races who are afraid that Earth is getting too big for their britches, so they decide to kill two birds with one stone by dumping all their most dangerous intergalactic criminals on Earth and penning them there. That's what Maximum Security was all about. And the Thunderbolts, which were a series written by Kurt Busiek, who was also writing the Maximum Security event, were very tightly caught up in the events of this whole thing, this Maximum Security thing. That is when Moonstone discovered that she had a little angel inside of her psyche, influencing her to do good things. And in Maximum Security... in this issue, Life Sentences, Songbird has a second encounter with a character who is going to become her conscience, her little internal Jiminy Cricket, Janice Vell, the son of Captain Marvel, who at this time was the star of his own ongoing series written by Peter David, Captain Marvel. These two characters encountered each other during the Maximum Security crossover, and that was a big deal because the relationship between these two characters was further spun out of the Avengers Forever 12-issue maxi series, subject of a semi-recent CGS BOM, a Book of the Month episode, so seek that out and listen to it. It's good stuff, as is the Avengers Forever maxi series, which you should also seek out and read because it's also good stuff, and also written by Kurt Busiek, It was learned in that Avengers Forever maxi series that Captain Marvel, Genis-Vell, and Songbird are eventually going to join the Avengers team and also be something of a romantic item. So that Maximum Security crossover is when those two characters first met in real-time, present-day Marvel Universe. And on that meeting, Songbird used a recently discovered new facet of her sonic powers, the ability to use hypersonics to plant hypnotic suggestions in other people's minds to get Genis-Vell to allow the Thunderbolts, so that they were trespassing aboard a Kree craft or something like that out in outer space, trying to infiltrate a spaceship of some kind, and Genis-Vell was out to stop them, but Songbird convinced him to let them go about their business, and because their aim was for the greater good in the end. And in this issue, Life Sentences, Captain Marvel shows up on her doorstep again. But not to seek retribution or anything like that, or even to lecture her, really. Rather because during that first encounter, I think his cosmic awareness gave him a little glimpse of what the future holds for the two of them together. So he knows what the readers know, that Avengers Forever lays out a romantic future for those two characters as both Avengers teammates and lovers. And Genis-Vell realized that on their first meeting. He also realized what Songbird was doing to him with her hypnotic powers, and he allowed her to get away with it, because I think he also saw that what they were doing was just and that they should be allowed to get away with it. So he let them go, but now here he is catching up with her because I think his powers have also let him know that she's in a bit of a quandary. And he just shows up, and the two of them go out to breakfast together, and they just have a nice long talk about the situation she's in, just in general, and more specifically this bit with the jewelry set that she's now going around with her, just having an internal dispute with herself over whether or not she should return it to the department store from which she stole it. And the underlying tension here, Genis-Vell doesn't spill to Songbird that what he knows about the two of them as an item. But he just kind of plays the... he's allowing himself to be in the ever-popular friend zone during the conversation between the two of them. And boy, do I ever know what Genis-Vell feels like here. He's just resigning himself to being the nice guy, the good friend who is just there for a woman for whom he feels certain feelings and with whom he would like to establish a deeper relationship at some future time, and just be there for her at a difficult time and help her to talk through issues she's having. And that's really all he's doing for her. He's like the cosmic nice guy here. Part Jiminy Cricket, part David Schwimmer, part Silver Surfer. And that's the service he's providing for Songbird. And in the end, of course, she makes the right decision, and the two of them part ways. And the whole time, she's not really sure what to make of this. She's a little wary of him. So I guess Marvel was kind of at a point here sort of comparable to what was going on in DC for a lot of years after Mark Waid and Alex Ross's Kingdom Come miniseries, which was sent in an alternate future of the DC universe, and was popular enough that DC editorial saw fit to encourage writers of various DC titles to move events and characters in the direction of their status quo as of Kingdom Come. So the Kingdom Come series was seen as a kind of manifest destiny for the DCU for some time after its publication back in '96. Avengers Forever set up something similar at Marvel, albeit for a much shorter time and not pursued nearly as seriously by nearly as many creators and or editors. But Fabian Nicieza does at least see fit to tease readers with the possibility that Genis-Vell and Songbird will eventually get together. And this is the first step along that road. This also somewhat reminds me of another contemporary development over at the DC Comics side of the fence. Genis-Vell showing up and sort of subtly prodding Songbird's life in a certain direction that will include him as her paramour. Reminds me of what's going on the DC side between Hawkman, the recently resurrected Carter Hall, and Hawkgirl, Kendra Saunders, the great niece, I think, of the Golden Age Hawkgirl, whose spirit transmigrated into her great niece's body. So it was something of a ready-made reincarnation of the Golden Age Hawkgirl. And here's the Golden Age Hawkman come back to life, trying to convince this woman that she is the reincarnation of his beloved, and that the two of them deserve to be together, that they're destined to be together, and the Kendra Saunders, the resurrected Hawk Girl, is having none of it, not believing him, not really wanting to believe him. And so this is just the romantic angling that seems to be going on as the subtext of what Captain Marvel is doing here in this issue. Reminds me of that. So yeah, a couple of connections between this issue and stati quo over at DC. It's just a fun thing to observe. So yeah, and then the fourth plot thread, the fourth character arc that's happening here is Abe Jenkins, the Beetle, discovers that his employers at this electronics store, this electrician, have been embezzling and inflating their estimates and stealing from their customers. And they offer to let him in on this, just break him in on the scam that they're running. Instead, he uses his own electronics expertise to wire the security cameras in the store to the Burton Canyon Police Department and blows their whole operation and scores himself a pretty sweet gig at a nearby S.H.I.E.L.D. installation as like a liaison to the local police, helping to increase technological communication between those two entities as a result of his blowing the whistle. So he comes through this with flying colors. Less successful, however, is Hawkeye. His temptation, his deal with the devil, comes in the person of a longtime Marvel Comics supervillain, perceived by many as a C or D-lister, perhaps unfairly, as Fabian Nicieza, to my delight, tries to prove in this story, a guy named Mentallo, who I'm pretty sure is a Jack Kirby creation. He is a telepath who was a longtime partner of The Fixer, who is another a longtime cast member of the Thunderbolts series. He was a part of the original Thunderbolts team when he changed his name and identity to Techno. So his old partner, Mentallo, is showing up here in Thunderbolts. He is being held at the Seagate facility, and he uses his fantastic mental powers, which the warden and guards of the Seagate facility apparently don't know he can still use in this sort of paralysis tank in which they keep him. He is able to use his mental powers to subdue guards and fellow inmates from beating up on Hawkeye during his time in jail. And he reaches out to Hawkeye and tells him, look, here's the deal. I will be your friend here on the inside. I will protect you, and in return, you will help me to break out of here eventually. And Hawkeye is pretty badly torn over this, too, but eventually, hopefully this isn't spoiling too much here, but he does accept the deal, and he, Mentallo, and a few other supervillains actually do break out of jail, and there's an extended arc in the Thunderbolts regular series after this, detailing what happens to this escaped chain gang of costumed convicts as they take it on the lam from the law. So yeah, this is it is kind of a key issue, really, in the long run of the ongoing first volume of Thunderbolts, and not to be missed if it's of any interest to any of you folks listening out there. So there will probably be more to say about things that happened before this issue and after it, and I'll pop back in, and there will be more to say about this when we do the Thunderbolts Spotlight, that is. And I'll probably pop back in and say a couple of things about this Life Sentences one-shot and redirect anyone who listens to that but didn't listen to this to come and listen to this. Because, I want as many downloads of these little solo efforts of mine as I can get. But, yeah, I encourage all of you listening to read Thunderbolts in general. But if you're going to do what I often do and just go out trolling those cheap bins for back issues of the series, do not forget to buy this issue, the Thunderbolts Life Sentences one-shot, and position it in your reading queue somewhere between Thunderbolts number 52 and 53. It's a can't-miss item for Thunderbolts collectors, completists, and also for fans of Charlie Adler. I darn near forgot to even comment further on the artwork. I don't know, why is art always an afterthought with me? I don't understand that about myself. But I've often said I'm really more a writer guy than an art guy. But not to detract from Mr. Adler's contribution to this issue. Well, actually, yes, to detract from his contributions, because honestly, his artwork is not what I'd call a selling point for me in my appreciation of this issue. It's just kind of liney and weird. There's not a very large body of superhero work that Charles Adler has done, and looking at this here, you can already tell that he's kind of headed for horror. The comicbookdb.com has told me, and I looked this up while I was talking to you all over the past several minutes, that he had already turned in several issues of the X-Files comic for Topps Comics before he had gotten around to doing this thing for Marvel and several other things that he did for Marvel. I think that sort of thing kind of defined it established what he'd be best known for. So, in this issue, there certainly are some uncanny occurrences happening between Mentalo and Graviton and Genisvel, but there's nobody eating anybody. So, that being so, we're not seeing Mr. Adler's proponent's strengths being put on display here. But still in all, if you're a fan of Charlie Adler and you'd like to add an Adler oddity to your art collection, you could do worse than to pick up Thunderbolts Life Sentences for that reason. All right, setting that aside then, let's move on to number 2 on our top of the pops here. This is going to be a second Marvel comic we're talking here. It was also released with a summer 2001 cover date, August in this case, and it also is a comic that is continuing from or spinning off from the events of the Maximum Security crossover. That darn event, it wouldn't go away so quickly. But yes, it's number 1 of a 3-issue miniseries dedicated to the character who's not a lot of people's favorites, but he's got a certain fan base. He's sort of like the Avenger you love to hate. It's the USAgent coming at you here. Issue number 1 of 3 in the middle of 2001. And the creative team for this is, writer and artist Jerry Ordway. It was a favorite creator of mine, and another favorite creator of mine, Carl Kiesel, handling the inks in a miniseries that's edited by Tom Brevoort, assistant edits Mark Sumerak. This is a story that does kind of pick up from where Kurt Busiek left the USAgent during the Maximum Security series, when USAgent was basically put in charge of coordinating the efforts of Earth's superhuman defenders in driving off the alien prison commissioners, for lack of a better term, that had the coalition of aliens that had gotten their heads together and decided to turn Earth into a maximum security pen just to keep their worst criminals and also the planet Earth out of their hair. USAgent was the one who was in charge of Earth's tactical response after all of that. And it was I'm 80% sure that the new costume that the agent is sporting in this miniseries was actually debuted during the Maximum Security event. Let's describe it as part riot gear, part the Evel Knievel stunt suit, and all Judge Dredd knockoff. Because it's tight black leather, it's with a couple of red and white stripes and a big gold star, and a little bit of eagle imagery. That was big with Judge Dredd, too. It's really the perfect symbol for the USAgent's brand of American patriotism, because it's just got that marvelously uneasy symbolic balance of freedom and fascism. Because he's kind of straddling the line between them, much as Judge Dredd did, but not to quite as great an extreme. So, now about this miniseries, this particular miniseries. This is actually the second USAgent miniseries that Marvel had published. I believe the second that it has published to date. The first one was back in the 90s, 1993, if I'm remembering correctly. And one of these funny little time bubble-related synchronicities that just came to my attention. The first issue of that 1993 miniseries is actually bubbling up to the top of my to-be-read pile, and I'll be reading it within the next week or so I'll be able to do a little compare and contrast. That miniseries was written by Mark Gruenwald, one of my favorite writers, one of my heroes and role models in the comics industry, actually, the late Mark Gruenwald, who was also the creator of the USAgent. He introduced in Captain America Volume 1, number 323, back in 1986. He wasn't called the USAgent at that time. Gruenwald originally called the character Super Patriot. And Gruenwald admitted that this character was intended from the ground up to be like an opposite number, or a kind of dark antithesis to Captain America, a patriotic hero who was in his own way no less dedicated to American values and ideals than Captain America was. It's just that his version of American values and ideals was kind of a distorted reflection of Cap's own. Grunwald said that he tried to make him the opposite of Captain America in a number of more superficial ways as well. Like Cap was a poor boy from New York, and the U.S. agent, alias John Walker, came from a well-to-do Southern family. Cap carried a shield, so Super Patriot wielded a flaming sword. A terrible swift sword, one might say. So he made like kind of a one-off appearance as somebody to play Cap off of, and I guess that issue met with a favorable response because Grunwald brought the character back once or twice, and then within a year, I think, of his first appearance, he was brought in as a replacement Captain America during a period when Cap broke his ties with the government, and I believe this is when he was known simply as the Captain back there in the late 80s. And then John Walker continued to wear the uniform of Captain America for over a year, I think, of the Captain America series, while Steve Rogers was running around calling himself the Captain. He even acquired his own version of Bucky during that time. But eventually and inevitably, of course, Steve Rogers found his way back into the role for which he was, extra-textually speaking, created. And John Walker, but as a character, I think Grunwald and others had kind of gotten accustomed to the big galoot and wanted to find something else to do with him. And so they came up with the identity of the USAgent for him to assume, and eventually he became involved with the West Coast Avengers, and then he was a member of Force Works, and, well, he's one of those characters that just won't go away, This is why I say there must be those people who are loyal to him, whether creators or readers, and probably both. And so it feels like... I said earlier that they wanted to find something else to do with him. It seems that that's what people at Marvel have been doing with him for years now. They're always in the process of finding something to do with him, and he's a character that people know, a character that people seem to want to read about, but nobody can quite seem to find a situation for him in the Marvel Universe that sticks. And, personally, your Time Bubble reviewer here, USAgent has always been kind of an interesting figure to me. Because I think I've mentioned, in fact I know I have, on this podcast and the CGS podcast itself, that I've always been interested in characters that are sort of like dark reflections or antitheses or doppelgangers of existing iconic characters. Like if there's one thing greater than a superheroic icon, it's... that same icon rotated 90 or 180 degrees. Why that is, I'm not entirely sure. Actually, a few months ago, I received an email from a listener by the name of Kevin Malcolm challenging me to self-analyze this aspect of my fandom a little more deeply. On some CGS podcast or other. And Kevin, I may take you up on that someday, but not right now. So that's why I've always kind of been interested in USAgent, just taking all that Captain America represents and setting it largely askew and dressing it up in a costume that's more like a black, red, white, and blue than it is just the colors of the actual American flag. And that's always been what the USAgent, as the USAgent, has been, both in color scheme and in character portrayal. But I find that actually I'm more interested nowadays I'm more interested in what they try to do to make us, the readers, care about this character than I am in the character himself. It's not to say that I don't care about the USAgent, but it's just kind of interesting seeing how they continue trying to fit this square peg into different round holes, and nothing quite sticks. So, as I said, the first thing they tried to do with him was send him off to the West Coast Avengers. John Byrne wrote him there for a while, and it was pretty entertaining, the way Byrne chose to interpret the character. Very much playing up his military past, and shows him as the kind of like the self-appointed top kick of the team, trying to whip his more, hedonistic teammates into shape. Of course, the West Coast Avengers didn't last forever. Then he became a part of the Force Works team that succeeded them. Then Kurt Busiek, that man is extremely sympathetic to, almost philanthropic towards, underused and underloved characters that are just kind of lying about taking space in the major superhero universes, Marvel in particular. So he found a use for USAgent while he was writing Thunderbolts. He set him up with a group of characters called the Jury, also forgotten and abandoned characters that were actually created for a Venom miniseries back in the early 90s. A bunch of armored bounty hunter mercenary types, privately funded, government tolerated, whose job it was to go out and hunt down loose supervillains. And so it was in that capacity that Busiek put the USAgent in that outfit and sent them after the Thunderbolts, since loose supervillains is pretty much what the Thunderbolts were as far as the government was concerned. And it was in that appearance that USAgent gained one of the new pieces of weaponry that he wields in this USAgent miniseries I'm about to start talking about. I'll get to that in a minute. And then, of course, he was part of the big relaunch of the post-Heroes Reborn Avengers series, again written by Busiek with art by George Perez, because every single character who had ever been an Avenger was a part of that. And then along came Maximum Security. USAgent, just his marvelously prickly and antagonistic self in that event as well. Busiek gave him a fairly central role, actually. And now Jerry Ordway has stepped in, and he gets to be the latest in a series of sponsors, if you will, for USAgent, to plead his case to comics fandom as a whole by giving them another reason, another opportunity, if more opportunity than reason, I'd argue, for to care about the USAgent. So here he is, first issue of 3. All right, so the new situation for the USAgent, latest in a line, he is now a part of a government-sponsored team called STARS, which is, of course, an acronym, and it stands for Superhuman Tactical Activities Response Squad. And it is, quote, the watchdog that governs all aspects of superpowered crime and imprisonment. So he gets to be their number one officer, and he's basically a government-sponsored bounty hunter who goes out and tracks down supervillain bail jumpers. Anytime a supervillain goes AWOL, he gets to go out and track that person down. And that's exactly what he's in the midst of doing as this story opens. He's going out to track down a C-list old Captain America villain named Machete. And he's doing so. He's clad in his brand new riot gear, stunt suit, Judge Dredd ripoff costume. And he's wielding some wonderful new toys that he's been given. First of all, there's he's wielding a new, I think it's about the third different version of a shield that he's carried. He hasn't had his flaming sword since he was Super Patriot, but he did carry a sort of a version of Cap's shield that was nowhere near as durable, of course, not being made of a one-of-a-kind alloy of adamantium and vibranium, the way Cap's was. Then he had a photon-based shield, but then Captain America himself, during Mark Waid's post-Heroes Reborn run on that title, he was forced to adopt a version of that shield. So USAgent, being the pouty little brother who trying to establish his own identity, he had to ditch his photon shield, and instead he's wielding this big, clunky-looking gold metal eagle-shaped shield. And that is what he was carrying during his appearance with the Jury in Thunderbolts some time ago. He's got kind of a smaller wrist-mounted version of the same here, not quite as big and clunky and unwieldy, and therefore doesn't afford him quite as much protection, but at least it's a little more lightweight from the looks of it. The other weapon he's got now, and it goes along with his super cop mystique that he's that Ordway's kind of laying on him here. He's got what he calls an energy truncheon, and what I'm going to call either a laser nightstick, because that's what it looks like, or a sawed-off lightsaber, because that's also what it looks like. So that should give you the basic idea of what it is. It's a little billy club or a little nightstick thing, the sort of thing a cop would wear as part of his riot gear. him with a blade made out of pure photonic energy, which he's able to use as a cutting torch or as an offensive weapon. And he gets pretty creative with it as he battles with machete in the first half of this first issue. So that's and also he's got a sweet new ride. There's a really high-tech flight vehicle which he calls the Black Mariah. Which I didn't know this until I did a little bit of preliminary research for this episode, but apparently that's an old-fashioned term for a police paddy wagon, something that either apprehended criminals or dangerous lunatics were carted off to the jailhouse and or asylum in. So that's what he's driving. It's a flight craft called the Black Mariah, top of the line, really sleek, sexy stuff, and of course he destroys it. He sees his he'll pay any price to get his man, so he just kind of ditches these things right and left, and it doesn't exactly endear him to his handlers back at Stars, shall we say. So speaking of Stars, USAgent actually does have himself a supporting cast this time out, too. In his first miniseries, it was pretty much just him. The West Coast Avengers were hanging around, and he went after Scourge. That was the plot of the first miniseries. This time out, he does have some supporting characters, some people who are working under him in Stars, his support team. He's got, there's Farley Mowat, who is kind of this snarky, gnomish little computer whiz. He looks kind of like a West Asian elf. He really does look like he came right out of the Hollow Tree. And he does the computer stuff, and he makes wisecracks. That's his function. Then there's Allie Magruder, who is sort of like his aide-de-camp, solicitous sort of big sister figure to him. Not exactly... neither one of them are that original as characters, but... I can say this much for them. Even in the intervening time between when I read this issue and when I finally got around to picking it back up to review for this podcast, I remembered their names. So that means that there must be something to these characters if they made enough impression on me that I managed to remember that they were in this story. Unfortunately, I don't think they made very many appearances after this miniseries, because... the USAgent could have benefited from their continued presence. We also have the gruff, long-suffering flight mechanic Frisco Pike, who balls out the USAgent every time he crashes another version of the Black Mariah. And let's not forget good old Dr. Valerie Cooper of the Commission on Superhuman Activities, who is a fixture in the Marvel Universe by now. People who remember the first volume of X Factor as written by Peter David should certainly remember that Val Cooper was an important supporting character there. And before that, she was the one who was responsible for appointing John Walker, the replacement Captain America, in the first place. So she and USAgent have a long history together, and she is definitely present in this miniseries and has an important role to play. Also introduced, and perhaps the most important of the supporting characters of them all, because this first issue is kind of named after her, one Callie Vries, female ex-SHIELD agent, and also an she was a classmate of John Walker at basic training back at during his early days, and she's also his ex-lover. So hence the title of this first issue, "The One That Got Away." Yeah, so she comes slipping back into John Walker's life here, much against his will and desire, but she is kind of foisted on him. She's a senatorial appointee to Stars, actually. There is one particular senator, Senator Warkowski, who is kind of a cliche character. He's just like the blowhard, loudmouth, sort of like a Senator Foghorn kind of figure who's for some reason has it in for Stars, thinks it's a waste of federal dollars, you might even say pork barrel spending. So he's assigned his own little mole to the agency to see if he can dig up some dirt on it and justify shutting it down. He also has other ulterior motives, which are revealed in the later issues of the miniseries, and I will not reveal them here. But anyway, so Callie Vries is his appointee, and so there's a little bit of friction between her and USAgent. Also a bit of romantic tension, which she goes out of her way to foment because she goes right up and plants one on him. A kiss, that is, not a punch. Although, and USAgent, for his part, is not sure which of those things he'd prefer to do to her. So yes, she's all up in his head in this first issue. So the cast is all in place. Actually, Callie Vries is sort of responsible for this first mission, the mission that the U.S. agent is on at the beginning of this issue, the apprehension of Machete. She's responsible for it going south, which doesn't endear her to U.S. agent or anyone else. And then by the end of the issue, they're off on another, even grander mission that's sort of tied to this one. Now, let me just stop here and say in praise of this U.S. Agent miniseries in general, that it, like the the Thunderbolts ongoing series, and the Citizen V and the V Battalion miniseries, which is also pretty closely connected to the Thunderbolts ongoing series, this is the kind of precious and rare early 2000s projects at Marvel that embraced the full breadth, the warp and the width, the ever-important and often invoked texture of the Marvel Universe and its history. The sort of project that poked its nose into corners of the Marvel Universe that a lot of other things Marvel was publishing, trying to imitate, dark, edgy action movies of the time. That it just sort of lost sight of some of the cool, fun stuff that exists in the Marvel Universe. And this series just goes looking for it. Okay, so in addition to this C-list Captain America villain that we're dredging up here, we learned that Machete was in the process of dealing some black market alien mind control technology, a leftover from the Maximum Security event, to Hydra. So we get U.S. Agent going through his paces, showing off his stuff to the reader by invading, basically just like a one-man attack squad going in there to a Hydra fortress trying to extract Machete. So we got Machete, we got Hydra, we get a special guest appearance by S.H.I.E.L.D. and Dum Dum Dugan to chew Walker out after this mission goes awry and Machete ends up dead. But then that mind control technology that Machete's trying to punt to Hydra, we discover is actually also being dealt to several other places by several other minor league supervillains. So we get to see Pound Cakes again. Pound Cakes, the superpowered wrestler, former teammate of Screamin' Mimi in The Grapplers, a whole group of evil superpowered wrestlers, introduced by Mark Gruenwalt, creator of the U.S. Agent, in an issue of Marvel 2-in-1 a long, long time ago. It's a whole team of these gorgeous ladies of wrestling, and Pound Cakes is... I can't even say the name without giggling. Pound Cakes, yes. A lady wrestler with magic boots that let her cause earthquakes when she stomped really hard, I think was her story. But anyway, so we get to see Pound Cakes being used in a Marvel comic again, because she's off to deal the same alien mind control technology to a rogue faction of Atlanteans. So you see, this is going in all kinds of different fun directions. And it's sort of making me a little bit sorry that... there wasn't enough response to this miniseries to justify an ongoing project for the U.S. Agent in this capacity. I would have read a monthly series with the U.S. Agent or almost any other character, really, doing this business of bounty hunting supervillains in the Marvel Universe. All kinds of fun stuff you could dig up with this concept. So, yeah, that's what's going on in this issue. So you've got the sort of cool... Marvel Universe texture stuff happening. You've got the new gear, the new supporting cast, a little bit of something old, a little bit of something new, and the character of the U.S. Agent himself is not forgotten in the midst of all this either. We do get a little bit of background, of his personal background recapped, his origins in Georgia, his time as Super Patriot and Captain America, and his personality, which is one of the biggest, loudest, and most obnoxious in the Marvel Universe, is on full display. Just as dogged, as gruff, as short-tempered, and pugnacious, and abrasive, and stiff-necked, and all-around love-to-hateable as he's ever been. So he's still doing what he does, and you also get a sense, he's definitely got a strong sense of duty, and you have to admire that about him. He loves America as an ideal, no less, I would say, in his own way than Captain America does. He is definitely an idealist in his own fundamentalist, thuggish way, and I kind of respect that about this character. He's all about getting his job done and having fun kicking people's faces in while he does it. So, yeah. It was a satisfying read, I must say, for a couple of different reasons. I mean, Jerry Ordway, He's not the strongest scripter around, but he's far from the weakest. He's about on the level of his old compere Dan Jurgens, who's also enjoyed a lot of success as a comic book writer. So, yeah, there are probably other writers who could have, done a little bit more with the character. And, for that matter, there are probably a few other pencilers that could have done a little bit more with the character than Mr. Ordway did. And I hate to make it sound like what I'm about to say is going to sound a bit like I'm slamming Mr. Ordway, which I hate to do, since we of CGS have just recently made his acquaintance, or, to be more precise, Pants did. Mr. Ordway was attending a convention up in Connecticut. Pants attended that convention, got to meet Jerry Ordway, got a commission from him, and also got him to sign our studio's bound copy of the original Who's Who in the DC Universe maxi series. So, we've got that as part of our desk set now, thanks to Pants. And I've always loved Jerry Ordway's art. He is one of my very favorite superhero artists. But that is the thing, though. He is really a superhero artist. And this is not so much a superhero story as it is kind of an action tactical ops story. And we're taking a guy who is best known for, classically styled, golden age flavored, especially, superhero art, and we're putting him on this concept about a high-tech, government-sponsored attack dog tracking down supervillain bail jumpers. The artwork is still very pretty. And Carl Kiesel's clean inks. Again, he's also best known for clean, classic superhero type stuff, and this just isn't that. It's good. It looks really good. It's beautiful in a neatly ruled, hatch-lined, 90s kind of way. Honestly, I felt at points like I was reading an early Valiant book, which, for better or worse. Maybe I'm thinking of Bob Layton's contributions to that. I guess that could be why I'm thinking of Valiant when I'm looking at this artwork. Well, anyway, it looks good, but it's, if anything, a little bit too clean and orderly for the subject matter. The technology that the USAgent is using, all of his weapons and all the computer systems and conference room equipment that is being shown here. It looks just fine, but it's a little too technical. Technical is not even the right word. A little too by the book. There are probably some other artists, again, that could have injected a little bit more gritty authenticity, maybe. Even as I say it, I don't think authenticity is quite the right word. I know from from my grad school experience that authenticity is a pretty highly contested term in many areas of popular culture. I took an entire class on authenticity in popular music at Bowling Green, and we're earning my master's, so I know that authenticity is maybe not exactly what I'm trying to say here, but just some more zeal to the drawings here. Someone who thinks these things, someone who's more of a fan of action movies, I guess, or like Tom Clancy's stuff could have done this up a little bit better. And even as I say it, though, I'm hard pressed to think of who might have been a better fit for this than Ordway himself. Someone who draws, paramilitary figures and their fighting machines. Funnily, the only name I'm coming up with here is John McCrae. And though that certainly would have brought more grit to the project, it would have been less authentic, whatever that happens to mean. But he tends to be awfully irreverent with his visuals in superhero or comics or superhero-adjacent comics. But still, I think it would have been rollicking good fun if McRae had done the artwork for this. And again, this is not exactly a complaint. It's just the expression of an opinion that maybe another artist would have been a better fit for the subject matter. So certainly no disrespect meant to Jerry Ordway or Carl Kiesel. It's if you're an Ordway fan, just pick up the book and see what you think. See if you agree with what I'm saying here. And also, it's just another one in a series of interesting attempts to try to do something with the USAgent character. So I don't know if you're one of those people out there who is a USAgent fan, but you probably ought to try this miniseries because it's kind of a unique stage in his evolution. And probably when he came the closest to being really happy in his work, I think, because he I don't think he ever really felt like he fit in that well with the wackos, the West Coast Avengers. So this was a little something different for him, and it seemed to suit him, but it simply was not to be that it would be served up to us, the readers, on a monthly basis. So it's just 3 issues of it out there, folks. I would recommend you give it a try. And finally, let's kick in the cosmic carburetor here aboard the Time Bubble and vibrate sideways through reality into the DC universe to talk about the third and last of my extended reviews here on this episode of the Time Bubble. Let's talk about an issue of what was, at that time, still arguably DC's flagship title, and I suppose probably is still arguably, although it would take a little more effort to argue since Batman outsells it by so much. And I'm talking about JLA. So this is the volume of JLA that began in 1996 with Grant Morrison and has continued up to the issue in question, number 55, cover dated August 2001, with Mark Waid at the helm. So yeah, this is the first issue of the 4-part arc Terror Incognita, as written by Mark Waid. It is actually the concluding arc of Mark Waid's run. So these 4 issues, plus I think there was one Christmas special issue or something like that after it. But so this is pretty much closing the book on Mark Waid's JLA for the time being. And I gotta say, this was really an excellent series at that time. It was massively popular when it debuted back in '96. It was Morrison's run, which was sort of a back to basics, treat the JLA as a pantheon of gods among men, and just really restore the silvery shine that the team used to have. And it was thunderously well received. It was massively popular. It was game changing. And that run lasted about as long as it should have. And then, the tough act to follow, though Grant Morrison was, Mark Waid stepped right in, and with his nearly unparalleled knowledge of DC history, his mastery of it, really, his knack for strong characterization, his gift for playing with long-standing well-known conventional ideas of a comic book universes and somehow finding new wrinkles, new fissures in them to probe and explore. He turned in some really fine stories during his run. I know that my friend Matt was a big fan of the Tower of Babel story, bat-centric occasion in the JLA's history that was. But this is Mark Waid's swan song, really, and it's an interesting little bookend between his run and Morrison's. Those of you who've read this volume of JLA will know that the first arc of Grant Morrison's JLA, and for those of you who haven't, there is a bit of a spoiler involved here. Be warned. It was called the Hyper Clan, and it was it's kind of a classic DC Comics plot line of a superhero or group of superheroes find themselves displaced in the hearts and minds and affections of their public by a new superhero or group of superheroes that seem to be able to do his, her, or their job better than he, she, or they could. And so they're left hanging around feeling sorry for themselves until it's revealed that this new team of, quote, heroes are nothing more than villains in disguise or alien invaders or something. And that's pretty much the case with the Hyper Clan. It turns out that they were a bunch of white Martians. Now, not the good Green Martians, like John Jones, the Martian Manhunter, founding member of the JLA, but these are the evil Martians, those Martians, from the other side of the planet. There's white skin, and you can tell that they're evil because their character design looks as much like an H.R. Giger, Ridley Scott alien as it does like the kind of Martian that John Jones is. You can tell because of the spines down their backbone, the sort of skeletal tail, the pronounced sharp teeth. Just take a look at the way they're drawn in this issue, number 55, because, spoiler again, the White Martians are back, and then you'll see what I'm talking about. But yes, this is Mark Waid bringing back the first opponent that his predecessor Grant Morrison had introduced as foes of the new JLA, and Morrison had left it That is, he left the situation with the White Martians at the conclusion and resolution of that first story arc, the HyperClan, in an unusual place. The solution the JLA had arrived upon, and instead of just executing or exiling the HyperClan, just banishing them to another dimension like they did with the Crime Syndicate, but way back in the Silver Age, put them in a bubble with warning signs written in every language they could think of, telling people, don't let these guys out. And instead of doing that, they came up with a different sort of prison for the HyperClan, these marauding white Martians, a prison of the mind. And so they had John Jones use all his mentalist mojo to hypnotize the white Martians into assuming human form and into believing that they were normal human beings leading normal human lives. And one of them, I think the last page of the last issue showed one of these transformed and brainwashed white Martians getting ready to go to work as a firefighter. And as longtime DC readers know, Martians, whether green or white, are all extremely vulnerable to fire. So I think the implication is that some of these Martians were kind of left to go to their own doom by having been thrust into these new lives, kicking and screaming. But it was kind of left in an odd place, and there was a sense that it was a little open-ended, and that there was no way this arrangement could possibly last for these characters. And I'm sure Mark Waid walked away from that feeling that way, and naturally he was practically tripping over himself, I'm sure, to be the one to resolve it before somebody else did. So yeah, it's kind of like that bit with the Fantastic Four's first encounter with the Skrulls, when the FF capture 3 Skrull spies, and Reed Richards, oddly enough, chooses to hypnotize these Skrulls into becoming cows and into believing that they're cows. And that was how they decided to just, okay, let's just walk away and leave them grazing here happily in this meadow. Let's not confine them or incarcerate them or anything. Let's just do that. A little weird. Weird, but kind of a Silver Agey thing. And that's really what Morrison was going with, kind of a modern-day cinematic extrapolation, like a big, massive, widescreen, cutting-edge reimagining of the basic Silver Age storytelling values on which the JLA was founded. And so it's not too surprising that he went with that kind of thing. It also kind of reminds one of like a 50s or 60s horror comics story. It's kind of an ironic, almost like a Tartarian punishment for these evil white Martians to be stuck in human lives like that. But, well, guess what? By JLA number 55, they've apparently remembered who they are and freed themselves, well, at least they've continued to use their human identities as cover, but they've kind of found one another, and they've been conniving with each other for some time to figure out how to take down the JLA and the world with them. And that's what this whole Terror Incognita 4-issue arc is all about. And so this first issue, which is entitled Came the Pale Riders, so pale, there's your hint. Now, if you've been reading the whole JLA series, you probably could have figured out just from that story title what was going to be going on in this issue, especially since it begins with John Jones, the Martian Manhunter, tracing a serial killer on his police beat in Denver, where he works as a cop disguised as human police officer John Jones. So he is the first of the JLA that, of necessity, that the White Martians decide to take down, because he would be the key to the JLA's ability to overthrow the White Martians and their plans. So they set a little mind trap for him, which unfortunately for the rest of the JLA he does indeed fall for. And then, now since their first and most crucial target out of the way, the Martians then proceed to systematically and premeditatedly go about neutralizing each and every one of all the other Leaguers. Which, come to think of it, is actually not unlike what Ra's al Ghul was doing in the Tower of Babel, that JLA arc by Mark Waid that I mentioned a few minutes ago that Matt enjoyed so much. But it makes for, as we get these sequences with different Leaguers being targeted by the Martians. It makes for some fun and or thrilling little character-centric scenelets and mini cliffhangers within the issue. Yeah, the one featuring Superman and his then-wife Lois Lane that's worthy of a Silver Age cover tease. Lois, under mind control by a white Martian who slips into the Daily Planet offices, walks over to her husband and rips his shirt open, revealing the Superman costume underneath to the whole city room. The resolution that Mark writes to get the characters out of that, how Superman and Lois are able to laugh that off and just diffuse everyone's suspicions after that reveal. That is a hoot. That's classic. And then there's other stuff happening, too, of course. Batman is very nearly sent plummeting to his death from a severed bat rope by his own partner, Nightwing. And then there's a JLA away team in the Russian port city of Murmansk. We got Green Lantern, The Flash, Plastic Man, and Wonder Woman, and they're all trying to deal with riots and looting that are going on in that Russian city. And so we get to see a little bit of the JLA in action, and then, however, some of the white Martians apparently tapped into one of the many decommissioned nuclear power plants and or nuclear submarines that are stored in Murmansk. This is Mark Waid doing his world knowledge and current events research here. They actually caused one of them to go meltdown, and the few leaguers on site then have to struggle to rescue as many... Green Lantern, Kyle Rayner at this time, of course, sets up this big green power ring-created dome to save most of the city from nuclear annihilation. And, it occurred to me as I was reading this that it's not... Look, what Waid is doing with Murmansk here is kind of parallel to what Morrison did with the similarly unfortunate city of Montevideo, Uruguay, in the DC 1 Million story. And it got me thinking, it must not be a really great early 2000s JLA story unless a Class C foreign city gets leveled. So, R.I.P. Murmansk. So we get, and in the midst of trying to rescue Murmansk from nuclear doom, a few white Martians who are there mind control the already panicked crowds into attacking the Leaguers, particularly Green Lantern, who is doing his level best to concentrate hard enough to keep this dome up. His pal Wally West of the Flash is trying to make conversation with him, and he just kind of screams, "Not now! Can I please concentrate? I'm the parasol in a hurricane here, dude." So it's Kyle Rayner intensity in Murmansk, man. I don't think I've ever seen Kyle Rayner written with quite so much grit, but still in character. Waid is good at that sort of thing. Although I have to, while I'm doling out praise for writing certain characters well, which Waid certainly does, I have to cluck my tongue a little bit at his portrayal of Wonder Woman here. Now, granted, he was on uncertain footing here. This has been a problem for the JLA series for quite a few years, and certainly was during this volume of the JLA, when tight continuity between titles was much a concern for editorial throughout the company, much more so than it is now in the age of the New 52, or whatever version, whatever they're calling their quote-unquote universe these days. But yeah, so it's difficult. It was difficult to coordinate what was going on in the lives of the individual JLA members and balance that out with the way they are portrayed or depicted in the JLA title. And I would say that Wonder Woman, funnily enough, was probably the one of the regular League members who gave the creative teams the most trouble that way. In this particular, there was that time when she was dead and her mother Hippolyta had to take her place in the JLA, and other weird things happening. In this issue, Princess Diana has to be drawn without her tiara, and this is to reflect some weird transitory plot point that was happening in Phil Jimenez's Wonder Woman run at that time, where Wonder Woman got angry at her mother and abdicated her title as princess, so she's not wearing her royal sign of office, the tiara. And that becomes kind of a point in the issue where Kyle calls her princess and somebody else has to hiss in his ear, "Ixnay" on the Oaks J. Yeah, so apparently there's So Kyle has to stammer out some kind of apology to try and save face. Wade was not sure, I have to imagine, what exactly to be doing with Diana. He's probably not sure what was going on in her head just then, may not have been aware of the full details of what was happening in Jimenez's Wonder Woman run that caused Diana to cease to be Princess Diana. And so, as a result, in this issue, I have to say that compared to the other characters, Wade does not write her with very much éclat. You know, she doesn't seem to have much in the way of personality. She speaks Russian, which is certainly in character for her. She's sort of an ambassador for her home of Themyscira to the rest of the Patriarch's world, so it's only fitting that she would learn a few words of all the world's major languages. But that seems to be basically her only function in this issue, though. She interprets dialogue for the Russian people around them. Her personality is not much on display, and I'm a little sorry that Wade let her slip out of his hands there, but it's not entirely his fault, I guess you could say. While we're on the subject of what Wade does and does not do well as a writer, let me go on to reiterate, or strengthen an earlier point that I made, that Mark Waid is a fine idea man as a comic book writer. Yeah, he's not quite as next level or high concept as a Grant Morrison, but he does at least have a real knack for putting new spins on, or finding new angles to, long-lived conventions of superhero comics in the major universes, and just pushing them on to their logical, often awesome and or horrific extremes. And so it's the kind of stuff that he just takes a character or an object or a location or a superpower. It's just something that's been a part of superhero comics at Marvel or DC for many, many years, and he finds something to do with it that is so cool and so, once done, seems so incredibly obvious that it's the kind of thing that just makes you beat your head with your palm and say, why the heck hasn't somebody else done it until now? But then with the next breath say, thank goodness Mark Waid got to it first, because other writers might not have pulled it off as well. Yeah, so he's able to do that and construct, 9 times out of 10, great, entertaining, unpretentious stories around these ideas of his. I throw the word unpretentious in there for those of you who may be down on Grant Morrison, because even though I love the man, even I must admit that sometimes he does succumb to a bit of pretension. But Mark Waid, rarely so. So this story is just a bunch of thrills and a bunch of, as I said, good cliffhangers happening here as we see the White Martians carry out their wicked plot, and by the end of the issue ends back with John Jones again, who is now the captive of the White Martians at one of their secret installations in Phoenix, Arizona, where they're about to torture him and possibly dissect him. The issue ends with one of the White Martians going, "Say, ah," which is tiny bit cheesy, Mr. Wade. It's not the strongest line of dialogue in the book, but it does at least bring across the hot water that Mr. Jones finds himself in at the end of this story. So, yeah, we don't get a very... we have only a few very subtle hints at what will be revealed to be the White Martians' master plan here. But I'll give you the hints that we are given. Lois Lane, before she's mind-controlled into revealing her husband's secret identity to the whole Daily Planet staff, is talking to Professor Emil Hamilton, a longtime Superman supporting cast member, about... a rash of asphyxiations that have been happening in a suburb of Metropolis. Later on, the Leaguers who are in Murmansk comment on how thin the air seems to be becoming. In Gotham City, during the Batman part of this issue, we're told that all the police squad cars in Gotham City refuse to start. Their combustion engines are on the fritz. So... I'm not going to give you any more elaboration than that. I mean, if you haven't read the story, think about what you know about Martians in the DC universe and ponder what all of these facts may mean. And that'll give you a little bit of a clue to what the White Martian, to at least part of what the White Martians have in mind. So, yes, this is quite a little going-away party that Mark Waid is throwing himself with this story. It's very exciting stuff, and it ties off an important loose end from the very beginning of Grant Morrison's landmark JLA run. Good stuff. Now, again, the artwork, let that be the finish line for this review. The artwork is, it's outstanding. It's the pencils are by Brian Hitch, and the inks are by Paul Neary. And It's so yeah. It's I don't know if I have to say much more about it than that. A few artists do a kind of grand scale cinematic gorgeousness that the JLA and before it the Authority need. And Brian Hitch is very good at that, if only he were a little better at meeting his deadlines, because gosh darn it, just about every single thing he draws ends up being released late. And surely enough, even though he and Paul Neary did the first issue of this Terror Incognita story, he then had to pass the baton to an artist named Mike Miller, less spectacular but more dependable penciler to finish off the final, the last 3 issues of the arc. But at least you get to enjoy a little bit of Hitch visuals, just as Alan Davis and Mark Farmer inspired as they are, which is always a good thing from my point of view, in this first issue of the story, number 55. So, yep. It's an important moment for the JLA, or for this version of the JLA anyway, and not too long after Mr. Wade signs off, the Joe Kelly run begins, which had its ups and downs also, and I will most assuredly say more about that at some future time here aboard the Time Bubble. But for now, there you go, JLA number 55. So, how about a few quick pops here to play us off at the end of this episode? All right, just a small pile of them here. I've got an issue from Jeff Johns' Flash run, issue number 175, which is part of Jeff Johns' series of rogue rehabilitation issues. Well, actually, I guess like renovation or reimagination or rejuvenation might be better words to use here, since rehabilitation would suggest that he's trying to make the rogues into upstanding members of society, paying their dues back to those they've harmed, when in fact he's just trying to make them worse and more effective criminals. So yeah, we've already seen new life breathed into Captain Cold, and now it's the Weather Wizard's turn as old Mark Martin blows into town in the first part of a story called Birthright, Eye of the Storm, in which Wally West, the fastest man alive, the Flash, and his wife Linda Park West discover that Wally may actually have a son from one of his earlier love interests, but the Weather Wizard has other ideas. He has plans of his own for the kid. And so this is Jeff Johns, along with artist Scott Collins, trying to make the Weather Wizard a little bit more dangerous by having him. He's learned how to do new things with his weather wand, and he shows up quoting Mark Twain. So it doesn't work quite as well for me as what Johns did with Captain Cold, but hey, it's something. Then there's Green Lantern, number 140. This is part of the Judd Winnick and Darryl Banks run. This is right on the cusp of the kind of long-running Ion arc, in which Kyle Rayner discovers that he's absorbing more and more Green Lantern energy. His power ring is displaying heightened powers and abilities and capacities that it never had before, and so he goes to Alan Scott, the original Green Lantern, for a little bit of advice and also a little bit of male bonding. In fact, the title of this issue is Alpha Male Bonding, and there's really no villain in the story. It's just the two of them talking things over, and also there's, for you action mavens, there's also scenes of the two of them sparring with each other, just testing the power limits of their respective rings against each other in a little innocent skirmish combat. It's also a fun issue and lots of good character moments, as many things that Judd Winnick's writes tend to be. Then there's an issue of Alan Moore and J.H. Williams III's Promethea, number 15, entitled Mercury Rising, in which the Sophie Bangs and her predecessor as Promethea, Barbara Shelley, go on, they continue their very long adventure through the realms of the Immateria, as Alan Moore gives us sort of an object lesson in the workings of mysticism and the Kabbalah. This is sort of stuff that he grooves on. This is his way of educating the public and so half telling a story in the process. I mention it mostly because there are some truly eye-popping visuals and trick panels put together here by J.H. Williams III. That's what really makes this issue shine. Plus a couple of guest cameo appearances by some real-life historical figures. Aleister Crowley, you may have heard that Black Sabbath wrote a song about him once. The historical alchemist and mystic John Dee. not the DC comic supervillain Dr. Destiny, whose real name was John Dee, but the actual guy after whom that character was named, and also the psychedelic artist and part-time magician Austin Spare. They are all guest stars in this issue. Fun stuff. And finally, an issue of Jeff Johns' JSA run. It's sort of an interim issue, a breather after the Return of Hawkman series. It's issue number 26, and it shows on the cover Hawkman standing with his fellow JSAers next to that round meeting table. That's an image that's so famously associated with the JSA as a group. And it's just everyone taking a breath and hanging out with one another. There's some sort of soap opera moments of character interaction, the advancement of some subplots as everybody catches their breaths after Hawkman has returned from the dead. There's some pretty tense, meaty stuff happening in this issue, and it was a fun one. The title is Who Do You Trust? Just ever so slightly ungrammatical of Jeff Johns. It's kind of been a recurring problem in his scripts. I think whom do you trust is really the way it ought to be phrased. So it's JSAers, some of whom do not get along with each other at all. For example, Black Adam, for example, is hanging around the JSA Brownstone and causing some friction by his presence. But also some other trust issues happening in this issue. There is a great final page cliffhanger. That's our last quick pop of this excursion in the time bubble. And I do thank all of you for jaunting along with me this time around. Again, I'm sorry that I don't have a few more comics to talk about, but hey, anytime I can get in one of these episodes in under 2 hours, I have to think I'm giving myself a vacation here. So thank you for listening along, and thank you also for your patience. We'll get you more episodes of both the Time Bubble and, more importantly, Comic Geek Speak proper in the weeks and months that will follow. Let me remind you, as always, to stop by thecomicforums.com and pop into the inevitable Time Bubble, the 25th Time Talkback thread to share whatever opinions and or reflections you may have on this episode. Before I sign off, though, let me remind you that this is something of a milestone episode, since it is the 25th episode, the 25th time I have joined you via microphone transmission from whatever point in the time stream I happen to be, to share with you what I've been reading. And I always like to end these, milestone episodes, anything that ends in a 0, typically, multiples of 10. I like to plan a special little musical outro for them. For this special silver episode, if you will, of the Time Bubble, I thought I'd go ahead and do something like that, too. And since, this is the silver anniversary, silver age of comics, I thought I'd put those together, mash them up, and come up with something from the 1960s to play for you at the conclusion of this episode. So, thanks once again for listening, and I will talk to you next time, even if